Welcome to another edition of the Parent Information Network. We have done some videos on Division I recruiting and junior college recruiting, and today I'm very, very happy to invite a good friend of mine, Micah Briscoe, the head coach at the Arizona Christian University, and he is going to talk about NAIA volleyball and the recruiting and the things that go with that. Mike is in his 8th season as head coach. He's the director of volleyball operations, and in 2019 was able to add to our sport by putting in both a men's and a beach program at Arizona Christian. In 2019, he was awarded the AVCA 30 under 30 coach award, and under Coach Briscoe, the Firestorm have produced 8 all GSAC performers, including a Libero of the Year winner. Micah, thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you with us. And maybe you can expound a little bit on your bio.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me out, Eric. It's good to kind of shed some light on some of the different volleyball opportunities available in the collegiate world. And yeah, I mean, I'd say the only thing that's even worth mentioning beyond this is being an AZ Region Beach Volleyball Champion. I mean, that's probably the most prestigious award I have on my docket, which you're well aware of since you were running those tournaments back in the day. So it's definitely fun to be on a call with you here.
Back in the day, great. Let's just talk. First of all, tell me what you need to do as far as recruiting goes for NAIA, maybe versus NCAA and junior college.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it's all going to be the same thing. I think the main difference is going to be some of the timings of how you do things. We're getting contacts from athletes, well out. Matter of fact, I think I just got my first contact from a 2030 athlete, which we're not quite in the process of recruiting just yet. But in general, I think it's mostly the timeline that's going to be different. For us, as we're going out and we're recruiting athletes, we're generally recruiting about 2 years out, to a year and a half out, depending on when that is. And so it just kind of adjusts your expectations on when you're going to be interacting with coaches and things like that. With the NAI, we don't have a lot of the red tape that some of the NCAA programs have to deal with, of dead periods and when they can talk to athletes. But in the NAI world, I mean, it's kind of the wild, wild west. So, we show up at preschools, we say, hey, let me find out who your parents are and how tall are they and all that type of stuff. And obviously that's a little bit over the top, but the truth is that we've got a lot of freedom when it comes to communicating with athletes. And so within that 2 to 1.5 year out from their graduation, that's really kind of when the NAI schools are going to be pretty heavily recruiting their next class.
So when should they actually start? How should they start? What's the best and most efficient way to for an athlete that's interested in playing for you to contact you, to get a hold of you, to get their information in front of you? Especially when should they start? Obviously 2030 is a little early.
Yes, yeah, 2030 is definitely a little early. It was very nice, good athlete who reached out, but definitely a little early. Yeah, so for example, right now we're about 1.5 years out from our class of 2026. And so we're heavily into that class right now with recruitment. But yeah, as far as just getting in contact with us and being efficient with communication is going to essentially always be by email, making sure that you're including all of the necessary pieces of information, so that we're not having to search for it, like knowing which class you're a part of, your position that you play, definitely film, keep your film efficient as well, like highlight the skills that are associated with your position. If you're a libero, we don't need to see 2 minutes of serving. We can see a couple, and that's good and that's helpful, but focus on the defense. So focus on the serve receive, finding those pieces of the game that are actually going to be most helpful to us as coaches to assess whether or not you're going to be the right fit for us. Same thing with that email, making sure that you are including any helpful pieces of information, like your tournament schedule that might be coming up, so that if we're going to be out of the tournament that you're going to be playing in, we can put you on our list and make sure to stop by your court and check you out. Same thing if there are any useful measurements that you've taken, like specs of like what your height is, what your vertical touch is with an approach, things like that. Those are definitely things that you can really quickly put that information in front of us and we can generally gauge pretty quickly whether or not someone's going to be at our level or not. And every NAIA school is going to vary based on their size and their talent and competitive excellence, what they're going to be looking for in that given athlete. But if those pieces of information are included in that email, that's at least going to give us a really good idea and help fast track some of that conversation.
Gotcha. What about scholastically? What are the requirements scholastically to get in an NAIA school?
Yeah, so I mean, from an NAIA overview, you only need to have a 2.0 on a 4.0 scale for a GPA. So you don't need to be the highest performing kid, but obviously a lot of schools are going to have stipulations on top of that if you want to make it into their university, and that's going to vary from school to school. But overall, with the NAIA, you need to have a 2.0 GPA. And in the women's volleyball world, we tend to have pretty high performing students on our roster, so we don't really have to spend a whole lot of time on that. But yes, no, that would be the base level standard that you would need to meet for the NAIA.
Okay. Can you talk about how scholarships are maybe a little different in the NAIA versus junior college? And I know NCAA is actually looking at kind of doing what you guys are doing now as far as part scholarships and things like that. So is it a scholarship pool of money and you dole it out based on what you need, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so every school is going to be different. Some schools are working with pools of money. I've got friends coaching out in Michigan and a lot of other places, and I've interacted with them on what their scholarshiping looks like. And there's quite the gradient of experiences there, where you've got people who have a pot of money that they're working with. You've got schools that are stacking and non-stacking. So there's really not going to be a consistent one answer, one size fits all for all the NAIA schools. But I would say that in general, you're going to find that a lot of the schools are going to be giving one institutional scholarship. A lot of them are going to be saying, hey, what does your athletic contribution look like? What does your academic contribution look like? And then depending on if the school is faith-based, that might be another added stipulation that they take into account of what they who they're accepting into their university. But a lot of times it's going to be one institutional scholarship that they're giving out. And so what I'll tell people, and this is very simple, but I think sometimes it needs to be said, is you mostly, when it comes to assessing these scholarships, is you're not necessarily looking at, well, how much am I getting athletically? How much am I getting academically? You really just need to be looking at, hey, how much am I getting overall, and what am I still owing afterwards? And that kind of simplifies the process. Yeah, so each university may look a little different in regards to that, but it is going to be more common that you're going to be getting one institutional offer that is for both your athletic and your academic contribution.
Okay. Can you, by the way, explain to parents what stacking is?
Yeah. So I mean, stacking in simple terms is just going to be, you're coming into a university and they say, oh, you've got a 3.5 GPA as an incoming freshman. You qualify for our whatever good student scholarship, we'll call it. And that's whatever, $14,000. And then your coach comes afterwards and assesses you at a tournament, gives you an offer, and he says, hey, we're going to give you $6,000 on top of that. And now you have a $20,000 scholarship that may be, depending on the price of the school, 60% of tuition and fees, along with room and board. And so that would be a typical stacking institution. That's what it would look like. You'd get your academic scholarship squared away if you qualify for one, and then you would see if you qualify for an athletic scholarship to stack on top of that.
Gotcha. So explain to me what you're looking for in athletes at the NAIA level. And so, for example, you go to a club tournament this weekend, wherever you're going to travel to, and what are you looking for from athletes on the court? Are you on the 16, 17s court? Are you on the 14s court, 18s court? What are you looking for body language wise? What are you looking for from athletes? Is there something that parents are doing or not doing that would be a red flag for a certain kid that you might be interested in? Can you explain that process?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so again, for us, we're going to be spending a lot of times on the 17s court and the 16s court. At this point, every once in a while, if we have a gap in our roster and we need somebody for that upcoming year, we're not generally recruiting that same class in the spring going into that upcoming fall season, but every once in a while we will be. So that will happen as well, and is not uncommon for a lot of NAIA schools, just because the recruitment does happen a little later, because a lot of times people are aiming for, shooting for the moon to start, and then maybe reality sets in a little bit and they're starting to realize maybe where they fit athletically, maybe more realistically, and they start to get in touch with schools that maybe are a better fit for them. So yeah, the things that we're going to be looking for, for us, it's going to be a little more unique. As at Arizona Christian, we are recruiting, athletes that are committed Christians. And so we're going to be looking to spend our time mostly with athletes who have really kind of self-identified. Most of the kids that we go out and watch are kids that have already reached out to us, and they send us their schedule and they say, hey, I'd love to be assessed by you. I'd love to consider ACU. And then those are the kids that go on to our whatever roster for our recruitment, and the athletes that we're going to be assessing. And so we'll use that as kind of our springboard, so that we're investing our energy in athletes that we already know are going to be institutional fits for a university. Now, not every school is going to be that way, but most schools at our level are going to mostly be spending all their time watching kids who have reached out to them. So we will do some cold recruiting where we're going out and we're watching courts and we're like, oh, we really like this kid. Let's look into this kid. And this is another good reminder. The first thing we might check is your Instagram. And so make sure that whatever you have on your social medias are going to represent you well, because coaches may be looking at that. So yeah, but from a logistical standpoint, we're going to be looking for athletes who have competed at a high level. So it does matter, if they're playing in the open level, they may be riding the bench at the open level, but that means that they're practicing with a very high level team that's competing at a high level regularly. That's going to be something that we're going to be looking for. Obviously, there are certain physical specs we're going to look for. A lot of coaches are going to want their attacking athletes touching higher than 9.5, higher than 9.7. Or if they're looking at a middle, maybe they want them touching 9.10 and higher. So, there's going to be certain specs like that we're going to look for. And beyond that, there's obviously a lot of intangibles that we're going to be considering as well. I think for me at this point, something that always is kind of coming to my mind, it's we're looking for driven athletes. We're looking for athletes who have an internal motivation. They're not just performing because they're getting a Snickers bar at the end of practice. It's they have a desire for excellence. They want to grow, because that's going to flow into everything they do. Coaches don't want to babysit. They don't want to make sure that, hey, are you going to class? Hey, are you getting good grades? Hey, are you following the nutrition plan that we gave you? It's we don't want to be doing that. We don't even have the resources to be, doing all of that. So we're trying to find ways within our spectrum of coaching at the collegiate world to find athletes that are going to fit in a way that they're going to be adding to who we are and not subtracting and taking away from maybe the focus and energy that we could be putting into their development. So that's something we're going to be looking for. We're always going to be looking for maybe morally rooted, you could put it, athletes, where it's we can trust them. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. The last thing any coach wants is somebody who's kind of double-minded. It's they're kind of half in, half out. Maybe they commit with the offer, but just for them to pull out later. Same thing, we're looking for kids who are going to enhance our culture. It's huge. I can tell you there have been multiple times where I have stopped recruiting a kid when I found out who their parent was. And I'm sitting watching a court and there is just an obnoxious parent there, and it just sticks out. And I come to find out the kid I was watching, that was their parent. And that was just the end of it. And that's tough, but we're watching and looking at a lot of kids. And so if we see things that are going to maybe have a high potential of creating a negative situation, we're going to avoid that, because we spend so much time with our athletes that we don't want to be put in that situation where, we're going to be having issues either relationally with the athletes or even relationally with the parents. So anyways, hopefully that answers a little bit of that.
Yeah, that answered a lot of them. Holy cow, it was really good. Hey, talk about, I think a lot of times parents kind of think that their daughter's going to play volleyball and she goes through preseason, plays in the season, and then it's just happy-go-lucky from there. Can you talk about, maybe what a typical day would be for an athlete in season, and then can you expand that further and talk about what an entire school year or season entails for these athletes?
Yeah, so when we're in season, depending on what level, but I know even for us at the NAIA level, our athletes move in at least a week prior to August 1st. August 1st is when we're able to begin our practices. We'll move in a week prior. We'll run a camp, which is meant to kind of be a soft move in to kind of get the relationships building. From there, we head right into our two-a-days. We typically are going to have a week and a half to 2 weeks of two-a-days. And that second weekend that we're here, we're off to our first tournament. So we'll typically have at least 3 non-conference tournaments prior to conference play. And then conference play is going to run all the way through the middle of November, and then postseason into the first week of December. So once we get through that first couple weeks of two-a-days, our regular flow begins. Every school is going to look a little different of when they practice. Some will do morning, some will do afternoon, some will do evening. It's important to note that in the smaller schools, the class offerings are going to look different. And so that may affect, when your practice is. You may have an evening practice for a certain school because they only offer classes at such and such times, and there's no way to practice during the day. So we practice about 2.5 hours Monday through Thursday. We essentially have matches every Friday, Saturday from the second weekend of August all the way through the middle of November. So from 2:30 to 5, they're going to be in practice. From 8 to 2, whatever, they're going to be doing their classes. We lift twice a week in season. And again, that's going to vary from school to school depending on if they have strength and conditioning programs that they're utilizing. For us, that's what the fall will mostly look like. Once we hit the end of the season in December, we're getting pretty close to when school's getting out. So our fall is pretty full. But the nice part in the NAIA is that there is a real balance. It's not going to have the same demands that maybe you may have at a higher level D1 or higher level D2, with having added sessions and things like that. So it's definitely a kind of a well-rounded experience.
Okay, and as far as the season goes, after the holidays, you guys come back and you're doing spring ball?
Yep. So once we get back in the spring, we generally speaking, you have 24 weeks in the NAIA that you can utilize over your full calendar year. So we'll typically have about 14 that we'll do in the fall, depending on how the year breaks down, and 10 in the spring. So at least for us here at ACU, we do 5 weeks prior to spring break and 5 weeks after spring break. And they will, it's still scaled down though. So instead of doing 4 or 5 days a week of practicing, we'll practice for 3 days a week. 1 day a week is going to be our study hall, and we'll do little devotions during that time as well. And then we will, in the first half, those first 5 weeks will be more like positional training, small group training. Our second 5 weeks is going to be more team oriented, doing team offense, defense, out of system, in system, and doing scrimmages. So we'll find local schools that will play and keep that competitive vibe going all the way through our spring. So definitely more scaled down with the time commitment that we're making in the spring, but they will also increase their time commitment in the weight room. So they'll go 3 days a week in the spring. So that's the general breakdown.
Yeah. Do you have some of your indoor athletes playing beach?
In the past we have. That has become less common now. We had last year we had 1 athlete. This year we didn't have any athletes, and that's mostly just because I think the beach volleyball world is getting more specialized and there's more athletes that are available to compete at that level. and there's less of a need. Every school is going to, again, be a little different in regards to that, because there will be some schools that will have both their indoor and beach team having multiple crossover athletes. But for us, at this point, we're essentially just having indoor athletes, and our beach program has their own athletes as well. Though we will cross-train ourselves in the springtime, just because we do value what the beach volleyball game offers to our indoor athletes. So we still will cross-train, but they just won't necessarily be on the varsity team for beach.
Gotcha. There's been some seismic shifts in the NCAA in the last 3, 4, 5 years with the NIL and the transfer portal. Junior college just saw the opportunity now to play junior college and then play another 4 years at a higher institution. Is there been any major changes to the NAIA? Are you guys being affected by the NIL and the transfer portal as much as the other divisions?
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't had any large shifts in that same way. The NAIA will generally follow a lot of what the NCAA is doing, especially when it comes to like the rules formats and things like that, and warm-ups, and like the double has been erased from our gameplay, just like it was for NCAA. But I know that with that eligibility ruling, we have not followed any of their rulings that they've done. But as more comes out with the NCAA, I'm sure the NAI will kind of check and see what's happening. And if they like what's happening, if they think it makes sense for us to make that same shift, that'll be a part of that. In regards to the transfer portal and NIL money, obviously that's going to disproportionately be affecting us because we don't have a lot of athletes at the NAI level that are going to be getting big sponsorships and financial incentives as much as maybe you'll find at that higher level D1 world. And same thing with the transfer portal. I mean, we at the NAI level, we don't have a transfer portal. People still transfer, but we just don't have a portal that we utilize for that. So I would say that there is definitely a trickle down effect that we're experiencing, but it has less to do with the NIL money. I think what we are starting to see is a very individualized experience of the athlete, where they're looking at what can I get? How does this benefit me? I think we're seeing a lot less of maybe that traditional, experience that maybe a lot of us are used to in regards to like our commitment level to our coaches, our commitment level to our teammates, our commitment level to our programs. I think we are starting to see a lot more of, man, I don't like how this is playing out. I don't like that I'm not starting. I don't like that this coach is challenging me and pushing me in ways I don't really want to be pushed. And so I think we are seeing kind of this adjustment from the athlete's perspective of kind of always looking out for themselves, trying to find where the grass is greener, or where they believe the grass is greener, and pursuing those things, which is disappointing. I think in a lot of ways, there are definitely times to be transferring. There's definitely times where it makes sense. But I think the level and how much we're seeing it is getting pretty unhealthy. And unfortunately, I think it's also the trickle down effect is also affecting the coaches as well, because, coaches at other levels, I know Purdue had quite a few of their athletes enter the transfer portal and they had a successful season. And it's like, okay, everyone's just going to start chasing the better athlete now because, players may just jump ship if they don't like your philosophy. If you're a midliner, whatever passer, whatever the philosophical piece is that you disagree with, it's like they're having to just plan on, hey, we've got you for a year. And so that's gonna change how coaches go out and recruit as well. Again, it's not going to affect us at the NAIA level quite as much, but it is definitely going to have an impact on the types of athletes that are coming through our doors and how they're approaching receiving coaching and how they're approaching their commitment to the program, whereas it was maybe in the past more understood that, hey, this is a 4-year deal and we're going to have you and we're going to develop you. And it's just a different world that we're in right now.
Yeah. So what advice would you give then to athletes and parents about not only this process, but moving forward? What would you want to give that, let them know from the NAIA level as far as recruiting information or playing information or training or whatever it might be? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think the most important part of this piece is you really have to know what you want, right? You have to know what you're actually looking for in your collegiate experience. Um, you know, a really good piece of advice would be, maybe even at the surface level of like, okay, let's say worst possible scenario, volleyball's taken away from you. Maybe you have a, career-ending injury, or somehow your eligibility is affected and you're not able to play. It's like you want to make sure that you're at a school that you want to be at. You're at a school where you have a support system that is going to be there for you. You want to make sure that you're in a place where you're just not going to hate it outside of volleyball, and people do that all the time. It's like, sure, I'll go play in the tundra as long as I get to play volleyball, which is a lot of times how the guys' side of the world functions, and I'm guilty of that as well. But we need to be thinking beyond the volleyball a little bit. And then when it comes to the volleyball side of it, you need to make sure that you're doing your homework. You need to make sure that you're recognizing why a school is going to be a good fit for you. A lot of times, a lot of those negative experiences are going to come when it's like, well, I've got to play D1 or I've got to play D2. I need that badge. And then you ride the bench and maybe you don't have a great experience doing that. Or maybe for, a given athlete, they really want to go to this school, because it was the right price, and you can afford it, but you're not getting the support, and maybe you don't like your coach. There's all these different facets. And so every single person needs to do their research to make sure, because again, at least right now, we're talking about women's volleyball. I've got 3 daughters of my own. And so it's like, I'm very much going to be very keen on, hey, who's going to be the coach who's overseeing my daughters? What type of culture does this program have? Because not all cultures are equal. There's going to be cultures that are dealing with big issues, drug issues. And, and it's like, nobody expects that. Nobody thinks about that, because when you typically talk about college sports, we're only talking about the fun parts. But the truth is, in a lot of these team settings, there are big trials that some programs have to go through. And so I would say that doing your research, doing your homework, making sure that you know the school and how it actually aligns with who you are and who your daughter is, making sure that the coach's vision and their culture are going to align with where your daughter's going to fit well, and making sure that your daughter is an athletic fit for the program that you're trying to enter into, because those are going to be some big topic issues that are going to pay dividends if you do it correctly.
Gotcha. We're winding down here, and you've given us so much good insight and information. What would be the 3, 4, even 5 big rocks that you would want parents and kids to take away from what you've talked about today?
Yeah, well, I would say this probably goes for the parents, since this is for the parents, is be realistic. Be realistic with your assessment. And it's so hard, as parents, I'm always going to think that my kid's the best. I already think my kids are the best. And so, that's just going to be something where you have to find ways to get outside of that echo chamber where, you think that you have an idea of where your daughter sits athletically. Find people outside of your circle who will give you like very realistic feedback on where your athlete sits. And a great way to do this too is by reaching out to college coaches. You're going to get a really good idea of where your athletic, where you're at in that spectrum by which coaches are reaching back out to you. It's like if you're only hearing back from D1s, like you've probably got D1 material kid. If you're only hearing back, from whatever program, like that's going to give you a good idea of where you fit athletically. So I think being realistic is going to be probably the most helpful part of that process. I think sitting down with your kids and really gauging what they want. because everyone's going to be a little bit different. There are certain things that are pretty common throughout, but really finding out what your athlete wants, what your daughter wants out of her experience, because that is going to determine whether or not it's going to be a good fit and a positive experience. Because sometimes there's just things that they're not going to think about. They're going to think, oh, you know what? This school in North Dakota, no, nothing against the North Dakota schools, but this school in North Dakota, like, I want to go here. Like, this is a whatever program, and they're competitively excellent and all this stuff. And then you get there as an Arizona kid, and you're like, what's this white stuff on the ground? And why are my eyelashes frozen solid? And so it's like you have to do a little bit of the work on the front end to make sure that you have a positive experience afterwards. So I think that would be really big. And yeah, I think that probably another thing to throw into this conversation would be the NAIA specifically is going to be, it's going to have more faith-related institutions within their overall institution. And so I think that would be an important thing as well, because a lot of the people who are in the NAIA world are maybe looking for a private Christian school or private Catholic school, because there's a lot of different opportunities there. The NAIA world is going to be much more popular for people who are looking for maybe a more communal environment where in the classroom they're knowing their professors and interacting with their classmates versus maybe some of those larger college experiences where you have classes of 100 and more. And so I think that understanding those pieces will be helpful in that process. And then that's where, again, understanding the school comes into play, because not all faith institutions as universities are going to be the same. Whereas like, at ACU, all of our athletes actually sign a statement of faith. So they're what we would call covenantal. It's like people who we're recruiting to this school are committed Christians. Whereas other schools, like some that we even have in our conference, they're Christian universities, but you don't actually have to be a Christian to go there. So I think having a good idea of what is your fit is going to be really important in that conversation. And probably the last part that I would say is that consistent communication. I can tell you this, we've had athletes that have reached out to us over and over and over and over again. And I actually was not interested in the athlete, but they did such a phenomenal job at staying consistent with their communication, conveying that they're interested in our university, that it makes us like say, okay, we really need to take a closer look at this athlete. This is somebody who really wants to be here. So if there's something you are really after, you've gotten realistic feedback of where your athlete sits, I would say be consistent with your communication. Once you've found your that place in the spectrum of where your athlete fits athletically, academically, and again, faith-wise, if that's a part of that institution, then I would say be consistent with your communication. Don't wait for someone to come find you. You have to be assertive in the process, and you need to tap a coach's shoulder. You need to reach out, find their email, fill out their recruit form, and show your interest level, because that will pay dividends for you later on.
I think that last point is really important. There's always been, I ran a club for a long time, and you'd always have those kids and you say, hey, you ready to play on it? And they would go, I guess maybe. And the answer and then is no, right? If you don't want it that much, yeah, you just stay out of the process, because you got to be fully committed to this. And I think that's really good advice. Yeah. So Micah, listen, thank you very much for your time, your insight, your information. We greatly appreciate it, the Arizona region. If any parent wanted to reach out to you and maybe ask a question through email about the NAIA, do you have an email you would want to give them?
Yeah, for sure. They can access my email. I can tell it to you too, but if they go to acufirestorm.com, they can find my email on there, but it's micah.briscoe@arizonachristian.edu. And I'd be happy. I literally just responded to an athlete who was looking for training, and it was a parent who reached out. So I don't know if all coaches will respond to emails, but if you shoot me an email, I'll be happy to answer any questions you do have.
That's great. Thank you so much. You've been a great friend of the region and a great friend of beach volleyball in the region as well. And congratulations on all you've been able to do at Arizona Christian. Parents, if you have any questions for Micah regarding NAIA, email him. Thank you very much for your time. Micah, we appreciate it, and good luck on the season.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you having us on.